Well, born in Merrill, Wisconsin.
Okay.
My parents were teachers. My mom was a teacher, and my dad was working in the printing industry. And we were there until through high school, 1948. And they moved to a little town by the name of McFarland. And in 1950, the Korean conflict started, and I just felt that I was ripe for being drafted in the Army and sent to Korea, which I had no interest in doing. So I enlisted in the Navy, and with my brother, one of my brothers, and went to Great Lakes for training. I was enlisted in the Great Lakes Drum and Bugle Corps, so I didn't have to go through all the normal training activities that one has to go through. I was asked at the end of the 90 days if I wanted to be the bugler in front of the Admiral's building, and I said, well, I think that'd be fine, but no thanks. So my assignment was to a fighter squadron in Jacksonville, Florida. These were 24 Corsairs. And my assignment was what they call a plane captain. Took care of the plane while the pilot was in training. So I was doing that a couple of years. Had a couple of trips to the Mediterranean and the Midway. And after the 2 years was up, I was sent to school and then left for an assignment in Santa Ana, California, in the Supply Corps, and spent the next 2 years in a very unexciting tour. Graduated or was discharged, and my folks had moved to Texas during that period of time, and so I came to Texas, and in 1954, and enrolled at the University of Texas, and under an accounting program. After a couple of years, I said, I really don't want to do this, and graduated with a general business degree. And during that time, toward the end of the tour at the university, met Nelda. She was a music major at the university, and we met at the a cappella choir after one rehearsal. And I thought to myself, I really need to pay more attention to her. So we began dating and were married in 1957, a couple of years. And when I was in the program at the university, in changing my degree program, I met my statistics professor on the drive, and he asked me if I had a job. And I said, no, I'm still interviewing used car dealerships. And he said, well, the planning department is looking for a planner. I said, well, what's a planning department? And so he said, well, you're interviewing, why don't you go down and learn all about planning? So I interviewed, and his last question was, well, why do you want to plan a city? I said, I think it'd be fun to do that. Without any other smart answer, it's one I gave, and I was hired. And my first office, physical office, was in the old city hall and in one of the jail cells on the third floor. Lime green and bars on the door. And so spent 3 years with the planning department doing zoning and subdivision development, and I decided that it was something I'd like to do. So I began to look at planning schools in the country and picked Georgia Tech because they would take folks who had graduated with, I don't want to say basket weaving or non-traditional planning, and so they would take anybody with any degree and train them to be a planning director. So we headed for Atlanta with a baby and began the program of study. And 2 years later, graduated with a planning degree from Georgia Tech. One of the interesting parts of that story is my thesis was on air rights development, and there wasn't much going on in the country on air rights. I got as much as I could. It ended up being 20 or 30 pages. And my professor said, when I was doing the final interview, he said, you know what I like about your thesis? I was excited to know that. He said, I liked your bibliography. That told me I better get out and head for somewhere else. But at that moment, the telephone rang, and it was the city manager in Waco. And he said they was looking for a planning director. And the administrator for the program gave me the phone. And it was maybe a week later, we were driving on our way to Waco. And was director of planning for 1 year. Couldn't stand it, it was so quiet. Didn't know what they were doing. Anything that was done at the approval of the dean, and some folks, very high folks in the city of Waco, that probably didn't want anything done anyway.
He was the president of the college.
Yes, so I was keeping track of Austin to see if anything happened, and the director told me about a position of being a planning coordinator, which I took immediately, and did that for about 5 years in the department.
Who was the planning director?
Hoyle Osborne was the director. He had some kind of a health problem. He smoked a lot. And one day when we were chatting, I commented that he didn't look like he was feeding very well. So he said, no, I'm really not. And I said, well, I'll help you with a letter of retirement or whatever. And he gave it to the city manager, and the city manager accepted his letter. And during that time, right at that time, the city manager left and a new manager came in, and his name was Dan Davidson. He came out of Florida with his boss, and he was a city planner, and so he came in with being appointed city manager in Austin, and I was his first appointment. So I went from planning coordinator to director of planning, and was director of planning for 13 years,
You remember what year it was that you became planning director?
1970,
Okay.
and was planning director for 13 years.
Okay.
And resigned in 1984.
Okay.
And I had been offered a position with Governor Conley and Ben Barnes, who had a development company partnership, and spent 5 years with them, doing mainly reviewing projects that they like to do and sort of giving them a planning idea of what the potential was for that kind of a project. And it was at a time when the real estate market crashed and the banks crashed, and I crashed, so I left the firm. And at that time, an engineering company was servicing the partnership, and they offered me a position with the company as their only planner, and my job was to review again projects that they had been wanting to be hired for,
And that was Licklider Jameson?
Licklider Jameson out of Houston. And I was with them until 1998. And things got to bad, and so I was let go. And about that time, Carol Barrett,
Yes.
excuse me, Carol Barrett was president of the chapter, and the chapter had hired a management company who had several clients, and the experience wasn't working out very well. So she wanted to know if I would be interested in being the administrator or the manager for the chapter. I said, of course. And so it began a 13-year marriage with the chapter, and I retired from them just last year, and was replaced by Mike
McAnally. It's okay?
McAnally a year ago. And since then I've been doing a lot of honeydews and not much planning, but a nice restful retirement.
Okay.
That brings us up to where we are.
Okay.
Not very well.
Well, let's go back and talk about some details.
Do it.
First question is, how did a statistics professor know that the planning department was hiring?
Have no idea. I don't think there must have been some communication,
Okay.
some way. He was in the business, school of business. Something might have come up. But it was a chance meeting, absolutely chance meeting. If we hadn't met on the drag, I wouldn't be here.
Be selling used cars?
I'd be selling used cars. But it was a something that resulted in a 40-year career in planning, which was one of the things I dearly love.
Well, let's go to the 70s when you were planning director, and I assume one of your biggest accomplishments was the Austin Tomorrow Plan. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I don't know, about a year after I joined the company, I joined the department, I began to think about planning, a new planning program. The city had no experience, none, in long-range planning. And what I found in the library was a plan that was done back in the 60s by a California firm, and they had done a plan, dumped it on the desk, headed back for California, and nothing was ever done with it. So much of it was happening in Austin. New industries were coming in, and the community was becoming a little more active with respect to showing up at public hearings. So I thought about doing a comprehensive plan, but my thought was we need to have a plan that starts from the bottom up, starts with the community, and with their participation, and ends with a plan that is subject to performance. And so I began talking to Dan Davidson, the manager, about doing a plan like that. And he was favorable to making an effort to do that. We had a staff of about 10 people, that were young people, that had joined the department over a year or so before. I knew of a federal program that supported planning from the bottom up with citizen participation. And so Dan and I began to meet with the mayor and the chairman of the planning commission.
Who was the mayor and who was the If you don't remember, that's okay.
Butler?
I'll think of it in a moment.
Okay.
And what we were trying to sell was a different way of doing planning. And that what we wanted them to do is release us to do it. What I mean was, with no experience in planning that the city had, and asking the mayor and the chairman of the planning commission authority to do planning in a different way. And it was rather courageous. They said, and looked at Dan Davidson, and they said, "What do you think?" And Dan just nodded his head and said, we should do it. And I was extremely, I was extremely excited because I hadn't any experience either, being a new planning director with no experience in doing major planning work. But we, with the staff, laid out a program of citizen participation and set up first a goals assembly of 250 people that we insisted be a match to what the census had for the community, and wanted young people, minorities, wanted business people, wanted students, we wanted people that represented a cross-section of the community, and submitted it to the mayor and the council, the commission. And they signed off on it, which was extremely courageous on their part, because there were organizations in town that I think were not too excited about releasing whatever power or authority they had. But the program was approved by the council to proceed with that kind of a goals for the community. So we spent the next year, the staff drafted technical reports that were studies of the economics and environment and transportation, healthcare, and submitted those reports to the commission and to organizations in town. And we began what we call the goals assembly meetings. We had 56 meetings. People were invited to come and attend the meetings, and notices were sent with school children and neighborhood organizations, hoping to have good attendance. The program was, folks were assigned an activity. For example, if you want to talk about the environment, here's a table for you to sit at. If you want to talk about transportation, here's a table to sit at. And during the evening, 3-hour meeting, you talked about all of the problems that you could think about, transportation. Anything you want to talk about, we listed. And in the next hour, we said, now, with all those problems, how would you solve those problems? And they brainstormed for an hour. And then after that, we said, okay, now, if you had to give priorities to those issues, tell us what they would be. So we started a meeting with people not really knowing where they were going with their participation, to issues that had a priority in the community. And then we gave them points for value. And so those with number 1 or number 10 down to number 1. Number 1 to number 10. I get it. And we had 56 meetings, and when we accumulated all of that data, we had what we felt was the participation by the community and the assignment of priorities that they gave to future planning for the city. And so we spent then, that took a couple of years to do, and we spent then the next few years drafting the Austin Tomorrow program. And it was adopted in 1979 by the city, and was the official plan for the city until the council and commission decided to do an update. And Imagine Austin is the new comprehensive plan that was adopted just recently, within the last year.
Were there any initiatives or goals from the Austin Tomorrow plan that surprised you, or anything of significance that you're particularly proud of?
Well, we had 2 issues that we wanted to make sure happen. One was we wanted the plan to reflect the environment, and we designed the plan to do that. And that was to give priority to the environmental issues, and mainly those issues were outside the city, east and west of town, that were in hill country areas with very sensitive environment, and agricultural areas to the east of town that had a whole different set of values with respect to protection. And The other issue was protection of the city neighborhoods, the urban environment. And in that case, we divided the community into those areas that were historic, the older neighborhoods that needed what we felt was a great deal of protection, because in so many cities, the older neighborhoods disappear, and they're replaced by multifamily and retail and commercial and industrial. And our neighborhoods were still sound enough to make sure that that didn't happen. And at the same time, we knew there was going to be some change that they were going to be affected by. So in our thinking about the future, we wanted to do an implementation program that did exactly that. Performance standards to protect those neighborhoods, performance standards to protect the environment. And I think we accomplished those issues and divided the plan itself into a policies plan with implementation. In the implementation through objectives and principle. My mind.
That's okay. Any staff members that worked on the plan that stand out to you?
One was Luther Paulnew, who I think he died just recently. He was the primary designer of moving from the goals program through the participation by the community and assigning priorities to the implementation. We still have a couple of people in town who are still with us. Craig Bell, yeah, who's been involved in planning in the water department all these years. But there are not many of us left.
During the 70s was a time of a lot of development too, and I assumed you were responsible for development review as well. Any particular projects that you...
Yeah, and I've got a list that I want to make sure I don't forget.
Okay.
The city's CIP program was not very well organized and not very active, so we set up a process and interviewed departments and through the city manager to set up a CIP process, one that was more organized, one that developed a 5-year program of moving from planning to implementation. We knew that the city was going to be, with our planning program, interested in having annexation priorities. So we knew what areas we wanted to get into the city and to get to services. We had a downtown design plan that simply identified what was there and what were features that were historic or what areas that were historic. We did a plan for Lake Austin corridor from the city on up to Mansfield Dam. We did a capital view study that is in a sense that there are views in the city that were important as you travel through the city or through areas in town that should not be tall, should have a height program, at least a height sensitivity.
So your master's thesis came in handy after?
It did. We had a neighborhood downzoning program. We had these existing neighborhoods that had been overzoned for years and years. So we took them to a program of downzoning that was more reflective of what was there. We had a historic ordinance that we adopted and was approved. We had a tree ordinance that protected large trees. We landscape development ordinance that protected, usually when developers were bringing their projects in, they usually tore down the trees. And so the plan was kind of naked. I mean, the projects were kind of naked, and we developed performance standards to protect the landscaping. But the big one was the land development code. And it was, after several years, was adopted. So I think we did a lot. While we were doing the comprehensive plan, we were doing a lot to take care of some of the issues that were more current and had to be taken care of kind of right away and not wait till the plan was developed. So those were a few things.
How did you meet Governor Connolly?
Nelda and I were sitting at lunch one day, and Ben Barnes, who is the governor's partner in this partnership, went over to talk to him. He knew that I had just resigned from the city, and asked him if I was interested in coming to work for the partnership. And I met Governor Connolly and spent 4 or 5 years in a wonderful partnership with him. And Ben was one that did most of the on-the-ground developing projects. And one of my responsibilities was simply to review them to see whether they were worth doing from a planning point of view. And was with them for that period. And enjoyed it.
Did you end up representing the partnership before the city, or?
None.
Okay.
Everything was internal. The folks that did that were more of the marketing people that
Any particular projects during that period of time that stand out to you?
none. They were we were kind of in a position where stuff was going bad. And
This was the mid-'80s, so.
mid-'80s. And most of their interest was in Oklahoma, in the states that surrounded Texas, and Barton Creek was the big one, and we were mainly interested. I mean, mainly working with the staff to see what was possible out there, because it was in the watershed, Barton Creek watershed. And so we negotiated with the county to build a bridge, $3 million bridge. We negotiated with the city on impervious cover. We negotiated with the city on density. We were just interested in building a resort community, and it was just important to work with them to get their approval I'm proceeding, because this was all outside the city. The county didn't have much power, but we wanted to make sure that we worked with them all to get the project built, and it happened.
Okay. And then your time at Licklider Jameson, any projects that stand
None.
out? Okay.
None. Most of the most of the projects had mainly engineering involved. Most of the projects budgets for planning were like, here's a budget of $100,000. The planners get $10,000, and the engineers get 90. So we didn't have much to do, and it was the same. We were in the same position, where after a while, it was time to leave, especially with Carol Barrett sitting in the wings. I got the message that my services were not necessary, needed, important, not of much priority. I said, thank you.
So before we talk about you working for APA, do you remember when you joined APA or AIP or ASPO, or what do you remember?
My joining, whatever the initials are, back in the 70s or so, I met John Shanahan, who was a member of the planning organization. And he told me about planning. He says, you really need to belong to that organization. And I said, I don't know anything about that organization. Tell me about it. So I did join and was not very active. Did very little, if nothing, with sections. But began to gain an important knowledge of what the organization did. And my hiring by the organization was extremely important for me, because it got me involved in an organization that had statewide interest in 3,000 members, and something that I thought I could bring some experience to. And so my priorities were to provide service to a board of directors that were elected from the community, and then to do the kinds of things that could be added to their programs that were important for planning in the state.
Any particular accomplishments during that time? I can think of a couple. One, you learned how to run a conference.
Why don't you mention those two?
And the other is your project to do training for commissioners out at the regional council.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple of programs that we began early because of that interest. One was the regional planning workshops. We did that for 10 years. And the purpose of the program was to get planning commissioners, to get planning issues closer to planning commissioners, so they began to have a greater knowledge of what their responsibilities were with their cities. Because frankly, there were probably many planning commissioners who were appointed that had no earthly idea what their responsibilities were, and here they were making important decisions, zoning decisions and capital program decisions that needed some guidance. So we would bring trained planners in as facilitators, and workshop guidelines on how we want to present our program. And I think it was a program well received. Our data began to get our data began to get dated. And so the program began, and we instituted another program called Planning Excellence, where all of the planning programs in the state were invited to submit how they educate and train their commissioners, but also their staffs, and what priorities they gave to those training programs. We wanted the planners to submit how they're doing on their comprehensive plans in transportation and environment, and parks and transportation, and how they're doing on their implementation ordinances. And so every year the invitation went out, and we usually had about 20 communities that submitted participation, but those 20 communities range from 3,000 people to 250,000 people, represented over 1.5 million Texans. Their communities represented that many people. So it was a touch that we wanted the cities to participate in. My participation with the board of directors. One of the newer programs was called the Action Plan, and Karen Walls brought the idea of doing an action plan for the chapter and implemented by the board. And so we've been doing citizen participation, implementation of planning, and it was kind of an extension of the Planning Excellence program. I participate in the election process, helping to get people who are interested in leadership positions with the chapter. I helped with the program called the Fellows, AICP Fellows program, which is a recognition of planners who do extraordinary work in planning for their communities. I worked with TML and helping who was our facilitator, who's working on it now. Well, you are. And helping to get the chapter an affiliate position with Texas Municipal League. And we're the largest organization, I think, in the league, being represented of all of the planners in Texas. We work with, the most recent is certification maintenance to help planners not be certified, but with their certification to go through AICP planning. We worked with the chapter on making sure bylaws were current and in compliance with national. Um, Outside the chapter, I was a lecturer at the University of Texas um, in their community and regional planning program. Other than that, I just took care of the chapter's conference planning program and worked with sections to design and lay out the program. I worked with them on their budget and worked with the chapter on its budget. In the conference planning program, worked with the board on getting hotels arranged and getting programs laid out, finding speakers to be involved. We reached out for associate organizations like the architects and engineering companies and others to participate in conferences. So it's been that work was extremely difficult, but at the same time rewarding because we had an outreach program that attempted to get as many people involved in the planning program as possible.
So you've been retired for a year. What have you been doing? You've been traveling? You've been spending time with grandkids?
Most of it has been a quiet time. We have made a couple of trips, one to Europe. We do a lot of honeydew. The property is an acre and it takes a lot of care. But we're involved heavily with our church.
And which church is that?
It's a Northwest Hills Methodist Church. Nelda's very involved in genealogy, more than maybe she likes to be, but it is extremely interesting to reach back and find out who your relatives have been and how you track them through time. I have not been at all involved with the chapter. We hired Mike McAnally as the new administrator, and he's been doing extremely good work, and I just don't feel that I need to be involved in his training and his implementation in running the chapter.
Well, he's got big shoes to fill.
Well, thank you.
I notice that there's one kind of avocation that's kind of run through your life, and that's music. You've talked about playing in the Navy band, and I know that you sing, and you want to talk to me about that?
Been involved in choirs, church choirs for the most part for 40 years. Sang with the community choral organization for several years.
Made trips.
Pardon?
Made trips, giving to choirs. From church choirs, we went to Mexico.
Oh yeah. We took a group to Europe twice, a choir trip to Europe, to Germany, East Germany, and England. We were there for a week or 10 days, both times. been a member of a barbershop quartet several times. Really a lot of fun to do. Thought about joining the barbershop chorus here, but the auditions were tougher now, and my voice is not that good. So, but music-wise, it's been a very effort of love.
Well, after all these years, do you have any advice for young planners?
Oh my. I think a lot about what I would have done. I was very fortunate in that the opportunities just kind of opened to someone who had no knowledge of what the organization was. Anyway, my thought is that being hired by a small community really is a place to do a lot of learning, because you get involved in most of the activities that a community is involved in. Not only in planning, but in zoning and subdivision work and economic development, historic preservation. And the smaller communities provide an opportunity for the young planner to be involved. My own feeling is that in the large city that one tends to be placed in a position where you have no opportunity for the broader issues of planning. You're in the zoning division, or you're in the subdivision division. And so you don't get the opportunity to be in a learning situation that the small community gives you. And we have, most of the communities around Austin are of that type. And most of the communities, when you look at their agendas, are very exciting. They're provide an opportunity for the planner to be involved in a lot of very exciting projects. So I would say, aim yourself in that direction. Make your first job one that you really should take. And even if you have to spend it a couple of years, it's a learning situation, and you move on with a more appreciation for what the profession provides and what the community provides. So I should do it.
Any final words, anything that we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
No.
Well, I appreciate you spending time, and I hope the tape works out this time. And I'll let you see it when we get it all put together.
I'm thankful that you gave me the opportunity, but my opportunity was not well taken. I think I could have been more organized. And
this was just a conversation. I think we covered everything. In fact, you've brought up things today that you didn't bring up last time
tell me.
that I was interested in. So. Okay, well, if you want, we'll go ahead and shut it off and
Well,
let you get back to
the one person that I look toward a historic position about the chapter is David Gaddis. And it was hard for me to think about things that you know about that I should mention. And I didn't. And you have so much of the history of what this organization is that I should have been the interviewer and you should have been the interviewee. Thank you.
Well, thank you.